She stood at my gate like she owned the sun, her designer sunglasses reflecting the morning light like weapons. Behind her, a convoy of SUVs stretched down the quiet lakeside road, engines idling, doors opening, strangers stepping out in fancy clothes, carrying trays of food and bottles of wine. I had no idea who these people were, but they acted like my land was their private resort. My hand rested on the cold metal of my gate, the gate I had installed with my own two hands 5 years ago, the gate that separated my peaceful world from the chaos that was about to unfold. I watched this woman approach me with the kind of entitlement that makes your blood pressure spike before a single word is spoken. She waved her manicured hand at me like I was hired help, like I existed solely to serve her whims. Little did she know, this was the moment everything would change. This is the story of how a neighborhood tyrant tried to steal my property, destroyed her own reputation, and ended up in handcuffs because she underestimated a quiet man who had learned patience in places she could never imagine. My name is Jake Miller. I am 47 years old, and I live on a piece of lakefront property that my wife and I purchased together back in 2009. She passed away 4 years ago, cancer, and since then it has just been me and my daughter Emily, who is now 14. This land means everything to me. It is not just property. It is the last piece of my wife I have left. We dreamed of this place when we were young and broke, saving every penny from my military salary while I was deployed overseas. When I came home for good, we finally had enough to make that dream real. We found this perfect spot on Cedar Lake, 3 acres of wooded paradise with a private dock and a small cabin that we renovated room by room, weekend after weekend, until it became our home. When Sarah got sick, she made me promise to never sell this place. She said it was where our family belonged, where Emily should grow up, where her spirit would stay long after she was gone. I have kept that promise through everything, through the grief that nearly broke me, through the financial struggles of being a single parent, through every obstacle life threw my way. And I was not about to let some entitled stranger take it from me now. Before we go any further, I need you to understand something important. If you believe that people like Karen should not be allowed to bully their neighbors into submission, if you think that entitled behavior needs to have real consequences, then you need to subscribe to this channel right now. We share stories every single day about people who think the rules do not apply to them and what happens when they finally meet someone who refuses to back down. These stories change lives. They remind us that standing up for ourselves matters. They show us that justice is still possible in a world that sometimes feels like the loudest voices always win. So hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and join our community of people who believe in fairness, in property rights, and in the satisfaction of watching entitled behavior meet its match. Now let me tell you about Linda, though everyone in the neighborhood called her Karen, and for very good reason. Linda had moved into the Oak Ridge subdivision about 3 years after we did. The subdivision was built on land that bordered my property, but my acreage was not part of it. My deed was clear, my boundaries were surveyed and marked, and there was absolutely no legal connection between my private land and their homeowners association. But Linda did not see it that way. From the moment she arrived, she began her campaign to take control of everything around her. She got herself elected president of the HOA within 6 months, and from that position, she ruled like a petty dictator. She fined people for having the wrong shade of beige on their mailboxes. She sent threatening letters to anyone whose grass grew a quarter-inch too tall. She banned holiday decorations she deemed tacky and demanded that all residents register their pets with her personally so she could approve their breeds. The stories my neighbors told me were almost unbelievable, but I believed them because I had seen her in action myself. The first time Karen tried to assert control over my property was about 2 years ago. She showed up unannounced on a Saturday morning, clipboard in hand, measuring tape dangling from her pocket. She walked right up to my fence and started taking notes, muttering about setback violations and unapproved structures. I watched her from my kitchen window for a good 10 minutes before I walked outside to confront her. "Excuse me," I said, keeping my voice calm. "Can I help you with something?" She looked up at me with this condescending smile, the kind that says she already knows she is right about everything. "Yes," she said, I'm conducting my monthly property inspection. Your fence appears to be 6 inches over the approved boundary line, and that shed in your backyard is not painted in an HOA-approved color. You will need to correct these violations within 30 days or face fines. I stared at her for a moment, genuinely confused. I'm not part of your HOA, I said. My land is completely separate. Look at the county records if you do not believe me. She laughed, this high-pitched dismissive laugh that set my teeth on edge. Everyone around this lake is under HOA jurisdiction, she said. It is for the good of the community. You cannot just opt out because you feel like it. That is not how this works. I spent the next week gathering documentation to prove what I already knew. My property deed clearly stated that my land was a separate parcel, purchased and recorded 15 years before the Oak Ridge subdivision was even planned. I had surveys, tax records, and correspondence from the county confirming my boundaries. I compiled everything into a folder and hand-delivered it to Corinne's house, thinking that would be the end of it. She took the folder without even looking inside, promised to review it, and closed the door in my face. 2 weeks later, she sent me a letter demanding $2,000 in back dues for HOA fees I supposedly owed. She included a payment schedule and a warning that failure to pay would result in a lien on my property. I threw that letter in the trash where it belonged, and I thought that was the end of it. But Corinne does not give up easily. Over the following months, she tried every trick she could think of. She sent me notices about mandatory meetings I was required to attend. She complained to the county about my supposedly unpermitted dock, which had been legally permitted for over a decade. She even tried to report my security cameras as a privacy violation, claiming they were pointed at her properties, which was impossible since my nearest neighbor was over 300 feet away. Each time I documented everything, responded through proper channels, and watched her schemes crumble. But I should have known she was building toward something bigger. Entitled people like Corinne do not accept defeat. They just wait for a better opportunity. That opportunity came on a warm Saturday morning in late June. I was drinking coffee on my porch, watching the mist rise off the lake, enjoying the kind of peaceful morning that reminded me why I loved this place so much. Emily was still asleep, exhausted from a school week that had worn her out. The birds were singing, the water was still, and for just a moment everything felt right with the world. Then I heard the engines. The first SUV came around the bend in the road, followed by another, then another, until I counted at least a dozen vehicles making their way toward my property. They pulled up along the road, parking wherever they pleased, blocking the narrow lane that served as the only access to my gate. Doors opened and people stepped out, dressed in summer party clothes, carrying coolers and folding chairs and platters of food covered in aluminium foil. I set down my coffee and walked toward the gate, my confusion growing with every step. That is when I saw her. Corinne emerged from a white Mercedes like royalty arriving at a coronation. She wore a flowing sundress and those expensive sunglasses that celebrities wear in magazine covers. Her hair was freshly styled, her makeup flawless, her confidence absolutely bulletproof. She walked straight toward my gate with a purpose that made my stomach tighten. Behind her, her guests arranged themselves like an audience waiting for a show, and I realized with growing dread that I was the main attraction. "Open the gate now," she barked, waving her manicured hand at me with a flicking motion like I was a servant who had kept her waiting too long. I took a breath, centered myself, and looked her straight in the eye. "This is private property," I said. "The gate stays closed." Her smile did not waver, but something in her eyes hardened. "You do not understand," she snapped. "This is a community event. You cannot deny access." I stood my ground, feet planted, voice steady. "I can," I said. And I just did. For a moment her mask slipped, and I saw the ugly frustration underneath. "If you do not open that gate in the next 10 seconds," she said, her voice rising, "I will have you fined and evicted." I almost laughed at that. Evicted from property I owned outright, with no mortgage, no liens, no legal claims against it whatsoever. She could not evict me if she tried. "Better call the cops," I said, pulling out my phone and unlocking the camera. "I am sure they will be very interested in what is happening here." That set her off completely. She spun around to face her guests, her arms raised dramatically, her voice pitched for maximum effect. "He is threatening us," she shouted. "Someone call the police." A few of her guests actually pulled out their phones, though most of them looked more confused than alarmed. I stayed exactly where I was, calm, patient, recording everything. I had learned a long time ago that the person who keeps their cool in a crisis is the person who controls the outcome. Karen could scream all she wanted. Reality was on my side. My daughter appeared in the window behind me, her face pale with worry. I caught her eye and gave her a small nod, trying to reassure her without words. "It is okay," I mouthed. "Go back inside." She hesitated, then retreated into the house. I felt a flash of anger that Karen had brought this drama to our home, had scared my child on what should have been a peaceful summer morning. But I pushed that anger down and locked it away. Getting emotional would only give her power. Instead, I focused on the facts. I knew my rights. I knew the law. And I knew that Karen was about to learn a very expensive lesson about the difference between perceived authority and actual authority. The police arrived within 10 minutes, two patrol cars with lights flashing, pulling up to the crowd of confused party guests like they had stumbled onto the scene of a crime. Karen rushed toward them before they even got out of their vehicles, her arms waving, her voice carrying across the water. "Officers, thank goodness you are here," she shouted. "This man is blocking community property. He is threatening us. We need him arrested immediately." The lead officer, a woman with short grey hair and a patient expression that suggested she had seen this kind of thing before, stepped out of her car and surveyed the scene. Her partner, a younger man with a notepad already in hand, positioned himself where he could observe the whole crowd. "Ma'am," the lead officer said, "I am going to need you to calm down and give me some space. Can you tell me what exactly is happening here?" Karen launched into her version of events, painting me as a dangerous recluse who had refused to honor community agreements and was now menacing innocent people just trying to enjoy a neighborhood gathering. She talked so fast and so loud that I could barely follow her logic, which was probably intentional. She wanted to overwhelm them with volume and emotion before anyone could examine the actual facts. But the officer was not easily overwhelmed. She nodded along, asked a few clarifying questions, then turned her attention to me. "Sir, can you step forward, please?" I walked to the gate, keeping my movements slow and non-threatening. I pulled out my wallet and handed her my driver's license. Then I pointed to the sign mounted on the steel gate, the sign I had put up years ago that read "Private Land, owned by Jake Miller" in clear black letters. "I have owned this property for 15 years, I said. "It is not part of any HOA. That woman and her guests are currently trespassing on the road easement that leads to my land, and she has been harassing me for months with false claims about my property status." Karen interrupted immediately. "That is ridiculous," she snapped. "He put that sign up himself. The HOA owns this access. I have the paperwork right here." She produced a folder full of printed documents and thrust them toward the officer with the confidence of someone presenting irrefutable evidence. The officer flipped through the pages slowly, her expression growing more skeptical with each passing second. I saw the HOA logo at the top of the papers, the same logo that appeared on all of Karen's official correspondence. Something told me she had created those documents herself, probably printed them out that very morning, thinking that a fish-looking letterhead would be enough to make her lies seem true. "Ma'am," the officer said finally, "these papers appear to be internal HOA documents. They do not have any legal authority over land ownership. Do you have a deed, a survey, or any official county records showing HOA ownership of this property?" Karen's smile flickered. "I have connections at City Hall," she said. "I can get whatever documents you need." The officer turned to me. "Sir, do you have proof that this land belongs to you?" I reached into my back pocket and pulled out the document I had been carrying for weeks, ever since Karen's harassment escalated to the point where I knew a confrontation was inevitable. It was a certified copy of my property deed, signed, stamped, and notarized by the county recorder's office. The date on the deed was 12 years before the Oak Ridge subdivision had even filed for development permits. I handed it over without a word. The officer studied the deed carefully, comparing it to the papers Karen had provided. After a long moment, she looked up at Karen with an expression that was part pity and part annoyance. "Ma'am," she said slowly. This land is clearly not under HOA control. According to this deed, it has been privately owned by Mr. Miller since before your development existed. I would strongly suggest that you and your guests leave immediately before I have to start writing citations for trespassing. But Karen did not back down. She never backed down. Instead, she straightened her spine and plastered on that condescending smile again. That cannot be right, she said. I know people in City Hall. I will have this sorted out by Monday, and when I do, this man will be the one facing consequences, not me. The officer sighed, the kind of deep, exhausted sigh that suggested she was running out of patience. Ma'am, that is your prerogative. But right now, you need to step back from this gate and keep your guests off private property. If we get called back here today, I will start making arrests. Understood. Karen nodded stiffly, but her eyes never left my face. The hatred there was palpable, hot and bitter and personal in a way that made me understand this was never really about lake access or community events. This was about control, about ego, about a woman who could not accept that anyone might be beyond her reach. The officers returned to their cars and drove off, and I thought maybe that would be the end of it. I should have known better. The moment the police cars disappeared around the bend, Karen's mask cracked. She stepped close to the fence, close enough that I could smell her expensive perfume and see the rage trembling in her perfectly made-up face. You will regret this, she hissed, her voice low and venomous. You think that badge in your past still makes you special. I felt my stomach drop. How did she know about my military service? I had never told anyone in the neighborhood about my background. I kept to myself, kept my head down, tried to live a quiet life away from everything I had seen and done overseas. She was not supposed to know any of that. Yeah, she whispered, smug satisfaction replacing some of the rage in her eyes. I checked the records. Ex-military, right? Lost your wife, raising a kid alone. Sad story, Jake. Maybe you are not stable enough to own lakefront property. Her words hit harder than I wanted them to. She had dug into my past, weaponized my grief, and was now using it to threaten me. For a moment, I felt the old darkness rising, the anger that I had worked so hard to control, the survival instincts that had kept me alive in war zones but had no place in civilian life. I took a breath and pushed it all back down. You really did your homework, I said quietly. Too bad you did not read the law while you were at it. She turned away from me and raised her voice so all her guests could hear. He is a threat, she shouted, pointing at me like I was a criminal. He is armed. He is unstable. Someone needs to document this. Her guests reacted with gasps and murmurs. Phones came out, cameras pointed in my direction, and I realized she was trying to create a narrative that she could use against me later. If she could not beat me legally, she would try to destroy me socially, paint me as a dangerous veteran who threatened innocent people at their community gathering. I lifted both hands slowly, keeping them visible and empty. No one is armed here, I said clearly, loud enough for everyone to hear. But I am going to ask you all one more time to step off my property before anyone breaks the law. But Karen was done listening to reason. She stormed back to her Mercedes and popped the trunk, revealing folding tables, coolers full of food, and banners that read HOA Summer Celebration in cheerful letters. She was not leaving. She was setting up. She started barking orders at her guests, directing them to arrange tables and chairs on the gravel road that led to my gate. Put the grill over there, she shouted. Keep the music loud. We are going to have our party right here, and there is nothing he can do about it. Her guests hesitated, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, but most of them complied. Within 20 minutes, they had set up what looked like a full tailgate party right on the edge of my property line, with speakers blasting country pop music so loud that it echoed across the lake. Emily came out onto the porch, her phone in her hand, recording the chaos below. Dad, she said quietly, is she allowed to do that? I looked at the crowd now dancing and drinking just feet from our fence, at Karen presiding over it all like the queen of her own little kingdom, at the strangers who had invaded our peaceful morning because one woman could not accept the word no. No, I said. She is not allowed. But she is about to find out how bad things get when you push a man who has been trained not to lose. I went back inside and sat down at my computer. The security system I had installed when we first moved in was more sophisticated than anyone realized. I had cameras covering every angle of my property, with audio recording capabilities that captured every word spoken within 50 feet of my fence line. The footage from the past 2 hours was damning. Karen threatening me, making false claims to police officers, defaming my character to her guests, all of it captured in crystal clear high definition. I burned copies to multiple drives and uploaded everything to a secure cloud server. Then I pulled out my phone and made a call. Marcus Henderson and I had served together in Afghanistan, back when we were both young enough to believe we could change the world and tough enough to survive when the world tried to change us instead. He had come home and joined the sheriff's department, working his way up to detective over the past decade. I had not spoken to him in almost a year, but some bonds do not weaken with time or distance. When he answered, his voice was the same as I remembered, warm and steady and immediately alert to the tension in my voice. "Jake," he said, "what is going on?" I explained the situation as briefly as I could, the harassment, the fake documents, the party now happening on my property line, the threats Karen had made about my stability and my past. Marcus listened without interrupting, and when I finished, he was silent for a long moment. "Send me the footage," he said finally. "All of it. I am going to make some calls." The music outside got louder. Through my window, I could see Karen dancing with a wine glass in her hand, performing for her audience like nothing was wrong. Her guests laughed and ate and pretended they were not complicit in harassment and trespassing. Some of them glanced toward my cameras with nervous expressions, probably wondering if they were making a mistake, but none of them left. The power of social pressure kept them there, too afraid of Karen's disapproval to listen to their own instincts. Then Karen's voice cut through the music, loud and mocking. "Hey, soldier boy," she shouted toward my porch. "Come join the party." "Oh, wait, you were not invited." Her friends laughed too loudly, the kind of forced laughter that covers up discomfort. I did not respond. I had learned a long time ago that silence scares loud people more than any confrontation. They do not know what to do with someone who refuses to play their game. So I sat on my porch and watched and waited and let Karen's anxiety build with every moment. I did not react. About an hour later, I heard the sound of more engines approaching. 3 pickup trucks came around the bend, county vehicles with official seals on the doors. Behind them was an unmarked sedan that I recognized as Marcus's personal car. Karen froze mid-laugh, her wine glass suspended in the air as she watched the convoy approach. The lead truck stopped at the edge of the gathering, and a man in a county uniform stepped out with a clipboard and a very serious expression. He was followed by 2 more officers, one of whom immediately began photographing the scene. Marcus got out of his sedan and walked toward me, but he kept his distance, maintaining the appearance of official neutrality even as his eyes communicated solidarity. The lead officer approached Karen with the calm authority of someone who does this every day. "Ma'am," he said, "we have received multiple reports about an unauthorized gathering on private property. Can you tell me what is happening here?" Karen recovered quickly, plastering on her most charming smile and stepping toward him with her hand extended like she was greeting a colleague at a business function. "Officer, there must be some misunderstanding," she said. "This is an HOA community event. We are simply using our designated lake access area." The officer did not shake her hand. He consulted his clipboard and looked up at her with an expression that offered no warmth whatsoever. "That is strange," he said, "because according to county records, this land belongs entirely to a Mr. Jake Miller, and you are currently trespassing on a private easement." Karen's smile flickered. "That cannot be correct," she said. "I run this neighborhood. I have been managing community affairs for 3 years, and I have documentation proving that this lake access belongs to the HOA. She reached for her folder of fake papers again, but the officer held up his hand. "Ma'am, we have already reviewed the relevant property records. The land you are standing on is private property. The road you blocked with your vehicles is a private easement. And the noise complaints from 3 adjacent properties give us more than enough reason to shut this gathering down immediately." He raised his voice so everyone could hear. "Everyone who is not listed on the deed for this property needs to step back behind the road line right now." This gathering is over. The party fell apart in seconds. Plates dropped, chairs folded, laughter dissolved into anxious whispers. People scrambled toward their cars, suddenly desperate to distance themselves from Karen and her failed scheme. Some of them actually apologized as they passed my fence, mumbling things like we did not know, and she told us it was okay. I watched them go without responding. They had made their choice when they decided to follow Karen's orders instead of their own common sense. But Karen did not move. She stood rooted to the spot, shaking with fury, staring at me like I had personally betrayed her. "You did this," she said, her voice cracking. "You called them. You think you have won something here. You have no idea who you are dealing with." I walked toward the gate, keeping my steps slow and deliberate. "No, Karen," I said. "I did not win anything. You just lost whatever respect anyone in this neighborhood still had for you." She blinked, and I saw tears forming in her eyes. Not sad tears, but angry tears, the tears of someone whose carefully constructed world is crumbling around them. Then she said something that made everyone stop. "You have no idea who I really am," she said. She reached into her purse and pulled out what looked like a badge, a gold shield in a leather case that she flashed at the officers with desperate authority. "I am with county planning," she announced. "I have full oversight of developments in this area, and I am ordering you to stand down and allow this event to continue." The lead officer took the badge from her hand and studied it for a long moment. His expression shifted from surprise to skepticism to something harder, something that told me Karen had just made the biggest mistake of her life. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "this badge is fake." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had ever experienced on a battlefield. Karen's guests froze in the process of packing their cars. The county officers exchanged glances loaded with meaning. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. Karen's voice broke. "No," she stammered. "That is not my brother works downtown. He said this was." The officer cut her off. "Impersonating a government official is a felony. Turn around, please. You are under arrest." I watched as they put the handcuffs on her, watched as her perfect world shattered around her like glass. The same people who had laughed at her jokes and followed her orders were now filming her arrest on their phones, probably already composing social media posts about the crazy HOA lady who got herself arrested at a lake party. Her expensive sunglasses fell off as they guided her toward the patrol car, and she did not even try to pick them up. She was too busy crying, those angry tears now mixed with something that looked a lot like fear. As they put her in the back of the car, she turned and looked at me through the window. "You ruined me," she mouthed. I looked her straight in the eye and shook my head. "No, Karen," I said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "You did that all by yourself." The patrol cars drove away with Karen in the back seat. The county trucks followed after the officers finished documenting the scene and taking statements from witnesses. Marcus stayed behind for a few minutes, standing with me by the gate as the last of the guests cleared out. "You okay?" he asked quietly. I thought about the question, really thought about it. The adrenaline was fading now, leaving behind a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. I had not wanted this confrontation. I had not asked to be the target of Karen's obsession. But I had handled it the right way, had protected my property and my daughter without losing my temper or compromising my principles. "Yeah," I said finally. "I think I am." Marcus nodded. "The footage you sent was comprehensive," he said. "Between the recorded threats, the false statements to police, and the fake badge, she's looking at multiple felony charges. Her lawyer is going to have a very interesting time trying to explain all of this to a judge." He paused. "You know there will be blowback, right? The HOA people are going to be angry. Some of them will probably blame you for what happened to their leader." I shrugged. "Let them," I said. "I did not start this fight. I just finished it." Marcus left after extracting a promise that I would come by for dinner sometime soon, let him and his wife cook me a real meal for once instead of the frozen dinners and takeout I had been living on since Sarah died. I agreed, knowing it would be good for me even as I dreaded the social energy it would require. Then I went back inside to check on Emily. She was sitting on the couch, her phone in her hand, scrolling through what looked like a news article. "Dad," she said as I walked in, "look at this. Someone already posted about what happened. There is a video of her getting arrested." I sat down next to her and looked at the screen. Sure enough, a local news site had already picked up the story. HOA president arrested for impersonating official at Lake Party, the headline read. The comments section was exploding with people sharing their own Karen stories, their own experiences with entitled neighbors and HOA tyrants, and people who thought rules only applied to everyone else. "Is this going to be weird at school?" Emily asked. "People knowing about what happened?" I put my arm around her and pulled her close. "Maybe," I said honestly. "But you did not do anything wrong, and neither did I. We just stood our ground and let the truth speak for itself. That is never something to be ashamed of." She leaned into me, and for a moment we just sat there together, father and daughter, survivors of a storm we had not asked for but had weathered anyway. Outside, the lake was calm again, the water reflecting the afternoon sun like nothing had happened. The chaos had passed, leaving behind only the quiet that we had fought so hard to protect. The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of updates about Karen's legal troubles. The county prosecutor charged her with impersonating a government official, filing false police reports, and criminal harassment. The fake documents she had created were examined by forensic experts who confirmed they were fabricated, probably printed on her home computer using templates she found online. Her brother, the supposed City Hall connection, turned out to be a low-level clerk who had no idea she had been using his name to legitimize her schemes. He cooperated fully with investigators and was not charged with any crime. The HOA, meanwhile, descended into chaos. Without Karen's iron-fisted control, the various factions that had been simmering beneath the surface erupted into open conflict. Board meetings became shouting matches. Legal threats flew in every direction. Several families put their homes on the market, citing the toxic neighborhood environment as their reason for leaving. I watched it all unfold with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness. These were my neighbors, after all, people I had lived near for 15 years. I did not want them to suffer because of one woman's megalomania. About a month after Karen's arrest, I received a letter from the new HOA board president, a quiet man named David Chen, who had apparently been one of Karen's most frequent targets. The letter was an official apology on behalf of the Homeowners Association, acknowledging that Karen had acted without authorization, that her harassment of me was not sanctioned by the community, and that the HOA would take steps to ensure nothing like this ever happened again. It was a nice gesture, and I appreciated the sentiment, even though I knew an apology could not undo the stress and fear that Karen had put me and Emily through. Karen's trial came 6 months later. I testified about the harassment, the fake documents, the threats to my stability and fitness as a parent. Emily testified too, describing how scared she had been watching the confrontation from the window, how her mom had died, and how much harder Karen had made their lives during what was already an impossibly difficult time. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours before returning guilty verdicts on all counts. The judge sentenced Karen to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months, plus mandatory community service and psychological evaluation upon release. I did not feel joy when I heard the verdict. I did not celebrate or cheer or even smile. I just felt tired, the deep bone tired of someone who had been fighting a battle they never wanted to fight. But underneath the exhaustion, there was something else, something lighter. It was peace. The kind of peace that comes from knowing you did the right thing, even when it was hard, even when you were afraid, even when the whole world seemed to be lined up against you. The night after the verdict, Emily and I walked down to the dock together and sat watching the sunset paint the water in shades of orange and gold. We did not talk much. We did not need to. The silence between us was comfortable now, filled with understanding and love and the shared knowledge that we had made it through something terrible together. "Dad," Emily said finally, breaking the quiet, "do you think Mom would be proud of us?" I felt the familiar ache in my chest, the one that never quite went away no matter how much time passed. "Yeah," I said softly, "I think she would be." Emily leaned her head against my shoulder, and we watched the last light fade from the sky. The stars came out one by one, reflected in the still water like scattered diamonds. Somewhere across the lake, someone was playing music, a gentle melody that drifted over the water like a blessing. It was peaceful. It was home. It was everything Sarah and I had dreamed of when we first found this place all those years ago. A few weeks later, I got a call from Marcus. He had news about Karen, who had apparently been causing problems at the correctional facility. She had tried to organize the other inmates into some kind of governance committee, complete with rules about shower schedules and visitation priorities. The guards had shut it down immediately, and she had been sent to solitary for a week as punishment. I did not know whether to laugh or shake my head in disbelief. Some people never learn. Some people cannot help themselves. Karen was apparently going to spend the rest of her life trying to control whatever tiny corner of the world she found herself in, never understanding that true strength comes from letting go, not holding on tighter. But that was not my problem anymore. My problem was figuring out what to make for dinner and helping Emily with her history homework and deciding whether to finally repaint the porch like I had been meaning to do for months. My problem was living my life, day by ordinary day, in the home that Sarah and I had built together, and that was a problem I was happy to have. I still think about that morning sometimes, the morning Karen showed up at my gate with her convoy of SUVs and her folder full of fake documents, and her unshakable belief that the world would bend to her will. I think about how close I came to losing my temper, how easy it would have been to give her exactly what she wanted, a reaction she could use against me, a moment of weakness that would have validated all her accusations about my instability. But I did not give in. I stayed calm. I documented everything. I trusted the system, even when the system seemed slow and frustrating and deaf to my complaints. And in the end, the truth won. That is the lesson I want you to take from this story. Not that entitled people always get what they deserve, because sometimes they do not. Sometimes the Karens of the world skate by on their connections and their confidence and their willingness to lie without flinching. But when you stay calm, when you document everything, when you stand firm in the knowledge that you are right and they are wrong, you give yourself the best possible chance of coming out on top. The truth is powerful, but only if you have the patience to let it work. If you made it this far, thank you for listening. I know this was a long story, but some stories deserve to be told in full, with all their complications and setbacks and moments of quiet triumph. If you have a story of your own, a neighbor from hell, an HOA tyrant, someone who tried to take what was yours and failed, I want to hear about it. Leave it in the comments. Share it with our community. Let other people know that they are not alone in their struggles and that standing up for yourself is always worth it, even when it is hard. And if you have not already, please subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story. Every day, we share tales of entitled behavior meeting real consequences, of ordinary people standing up to bullies and coming out the other side stronger. These stories matter. They remind us that we are not powerless, that the world can be fair, that justice is possible if we are willing to fight for it. My name is Jake Miller. I'm a widower, a father, a veteran, and a man who refused to let a stranger take what belonged to him. This is my story, but in some ways it is also your story, the story of everyone who has ever been pushed around by someone who thought they were above the rules. Thank you for listening. Thank you for caring. And remember, the next time someone tries to tell you that you do not belong where you worked hard to be, stand your ground. Document everything. And let the truth speak louder than any lie. The lake outside my window is calm tonight. Emily is doing homework in her room, probably listening to music on her headphones and pretending she cannot hear me when I call her for dinner. The porch swing creaks in the evening breeze, the same way it always has, the same way it did when Sarah used to sit out here with me watching the stars come out. This is my home. This is my peace. And no one is ever going to take it from me again.